Imagine a modern, highly developed European country where women actually outlive men.
Right, by a pretty significant margin, too.
Yeah, and where women receive just as much, or actually even slightly more education than men. You'd probably assume they're doing pretty well economically, right?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you would naturally assume that. It just makes logical sense.
But then you look at the wealth distribution, and you realize those same highly educated, long-living women are earning, like, barely more than half of what the men make.
It's truly a structural riddle.
It really is. Welcome to another deep dive. Today we're looking at Italy.
And we have this massive stack of data spanning from 1990 all the way to 2023.
Yeah, and it presents just one of the most baffling economic paradoxes you will ever see.
The tension in this multidimensional report is just palpable right from the start.
Totally. And I want to set the scene for you listening because the cover of this report basically tells you everything you need to know.
It's a brilliantly designed visual, honestly.
Whoever designed it is an absolute master of communication.
Yeah.
So on the left side of the cover, you have this beautiful, steady, optimistic line graph.
Tracing Italy's Human Development Index, the HDI.
Right, over
Okay.
the last 3 decades. And it is just relentlessly climbing. It's this upward slope of increasing prosperity, better health, expanding education.
It basically looks like a victory lap for the country.
Exactly. But then dominating the right side of the cover is this giant, glaring, almost violent red arrow.
And it's pointing sharply, aggressively straight down.
It shatters that whole optimistic narrative because that red arrow represents Italy's Gender Development Index, or GDI, specifically its global ranking.
Which is where the paradox really hits you.
Right, because back in 1990, Italy ranked 36th in the world on this metric. Fast forward to 2023, and that ranking has plummeted to 88th.
They dropped 52 spots.
52 spots, while their overall standard of living was supposedly skyrocketing.
Which, forces us to ask a very uncomfortable question about what we actually mean when we say a country is developed.
And that is exactly our mission for this deep dive. If you're listening to this and you live in the US or the UK or Canada, you might be thinking, well, I don't live in Italy. Why does this matter to me?
It matters because this isn't just a story about Southern Europe.
Exactly. It's a masterclass in how top-tier headline statistics can completely mask deep, structural, societal flaws.
We're going to learn how to critically read between the lines of global economic reports.
Because, I mean, how does that even happen? How can a society with top-tier health and massive wealth be taking such a huge step backward when it comes to economic gender parity?
Well, to untangle that, we have to completely discard the way we used to look at national success.
You mean just looking at GDP?
Exactly. For decades, the global gold standard for progress was just gross domestic product. If the line went up, the country was doing great.
If it went down, everyone panicked.
Right, a recession. But GDP is incredibly blind. It measures the total value of goods and services produced, but it tells you absolutely nothing about the human beings producing them.
Yeah, a country could have a massive GDP because it's like clear-cutting its forests and working its citizens to death in factories.
Precisely. The money looks great on paper, but the human reality is a nightmare.
It's the classic critique of pure capitalism as a measurement tool. It doesn't care if the wealth is hoarded by 5 people or shared by 50 million.
Or if the population is sick, so long as they're buying medicine.
Exactly. So this report we have uses a completely different toolkit, a much more sophisticated set of indicators from the UN.
We are going to be your analytical guides through a suite of 5 complex metrics. This is the multidimensional approach to human development.
It's designed to look under the hood of an economy, right?
Right.
Find the hidden blockages.
Right. And the foundation of this, the very first metric, is the HDI, the Human Development Index.
Which moves way beyond just money.
Considerably. It's a composite statistic. It certainly includes income, gross national income per capita, but it balances that with health and education.
So they weight those equally.
Yes. Health is measured by life expectancy at birth. Education is measured by the mean years of schooling for adults and the expected years of schooling for kids just entering the system.
The philosophy there being that true development is about expanding human capabilities.
Exactly. People should be the ultimate criteria for assessing a country.
Okay, so health, knowledge, and standard of living.
Hmm?
That makes sense. But the report doesn't stop there. It gets into what I call the alphabet soup of adjustments.
The adjustments are where the real story is.
Yeah, the first one is the GDI, the Gender Development Index.
Right, so the GDI takes that baseline HDI score we just talked about and basically splits it right down the middle by gender.
So it calculates a separate score for men and a separate one for women.
Yes, within the same country. And then it compares the ratio. It asks, are men getting all the health, knowledge, and income, or is it actually balanced?
So if a country has a phenomenal overall score, but the men hold like 80% of the wealth and get twice as much schooling.
The GDI will expose that immediately.
Okay, so GDI measures the gap in those basic capabilities. But then there's a third one that sounds almost identical, the GII, the Gender Inequality Index.
It is a vital distinction, though.
How so? Because it's easy to confuse them.
Where the GDI measures the gap in achievements like health, education, and income, the GII measures the structural barriers and human development costs of inequality.
So it's looking at different things entirely.
Yes. It focuses heavily on reproductive health, looking at maternal mortality and adolescent birth rates.
Okay.
It also measures empowerment by tracking the percentage of parliamentary seats held by women and the proportion of women with secondary education. And finally, it measures economic status specifically through labor market participation.
Well, let me see if I have this straight. The GEI asks, are men and women getting the same slice of the pie?
And the GII asks?
The GII asks, are there physical, political, or structural walls preventing women from even entering the bakery?
That is a very visceral way to put it, but yeah. The GII measures the structural oppression or liberation of women's bodies and political voices.
Got it. Now, the fourth metric is the IHDI, the Inequality Adjusted Human Development Index. And I am fascinated by the math on this one.
It's incredibly revealing, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. Because an average can be incredibly deceptive. If you and I are in a room with a billionaire, our average net worth is hundreds of millions of dollars.
But that average doesn't help you pay your rent.
Exactly. So how does the IHDI fix that?
It addresses the flaw of averages by asking how the country's development is actually distributed. It takes the HDI score and basically discounts it based on internal inequality.
It calculates a loss to human development.
Right. If a country is perfectly equal, its HDI and its IHDI will be the exact same number. But as inequality rises, the IHDI score drops further and further below the standard HDI.
So it shows you the reality of the median citizen rather than the statistical illusion of the average. It acts as a penalty for hoarding. I love that.
It's very effective. And finally, we have the fifth metric, which is relatively new, but perhaps the most urgent, the PHDI.
The Planetary Pressures Adjusted HDI.
Yeah.
Sounds very futuristic.
It takes a country's human development score and adjusts it based on that environmental destruction.
Okay, so specifically, what is it penalizing?
It penalizes a country for its level of carbon dioxide emissions and its material footprint per capita.
So if your country is wealthy, everyone lives a long time, and everyone is educated, but you did that by burning a mountain of coal.
The PHDI will absolutely pank your score.
That makes so much sense. Because historically, the traditional HDI heavily favored industrialized nations that polluted recklessly to build their wealth.
Exactly. The PHDI levels the playing field. It asks whether a nation's prosperity is actually sustainable on a finite planet.
Or if they're simply borrowing their high score from the future.
Right.
You know, the best way I can conceptualize this whole suite of 5 indicators is to think about a city's water infrastructure.
Oh, I like where this is going.
Yeah, so the old GDP metric was just looking at how much water was being pumped out of the reservoir. A million gallons a day. Great, we're doing fine.
And the basic HDI.
The basic HDI is like checking the water pressure at the main valve. Okay,
Yeah.
we have good flow, good pressure. But these adjusted metrics, the IHDI, GDI, GII, they're like sending a tiny camera down into the actual pipes.
They show you the leaky valves.
Yes, they show you that while the main pressure is high, the water is entirely bypassing half the neighborhoods in the city.
And the PHDI tells you if your reservoir is going to run dry in 10 years because you're pumping it too fast. It's a systemic diagnostic tool.
That's a perfect way to put it.
Yeah.
Now, to truly understand the shock of Italy's diagnostic results, we need to establish the baseline of the patient.
We need to look at the global context.
Let's do it. What does the global baseline look like according to this data? Because we can't judge Italy's progress in a vacuum.
According to the UN data tracking from 1990 to 2023, the world average HDI grew from 0.60 to 0.756.
Okay, so over 33 years, the global average goes from a 0.60 to roughly a 0.75. That is a massive, steady climb.
The water level is rising for humanity as a whole, to use your analogy.
Yeah, it is a remarkable story of global poverty reduction.
Yeah, absolutely. Medical advancement, expanded access to basic education, particularly in the developing world, more people are living longer and going to school than at any point in history.
The overall trajectory is overwhelmingly positive. But I'm guessing there's a however coming.
There are profound caveats. When you look closely at the global trend line, there is a very sharp, highly significant dip right at 2020.
2020. Obviously, the global pandemic.
The COVID-19 shock. The world HDI actively dropped for the first time since the index was created.
Wow, the first time ever.
Yes. Global life expectancy took a hit, economies contracted, and schools were shuttered worldwide. It's a stark reminder that human development is deeply fragile.
The steady march of progress can just be derailed by a biological black swan event in a matter of months.
Exactly. But there's another global statistic in this report that is, frankly, even more disturbing because it's entirely man-made.
You mean the global inequality tax?
Yes, the global IHDI data. The difference between potential development and actual distributed development.
Right. The data says that globally, in 2023, humanity loses about 22% of its potential development simply due to inequality.
The precise calculated loss is 21.9%.
What does that actually mean in practice?
It means if the wealth, education, and health outcomes that currently exist were distributed with perfect equality across the globe, our collective human development would be 22% higher.
Nearly a quarter of our potential as a species.
Yeah.
Just gone.
Vaporized into the friction of unequal distribution.
That is wild. It really puts things in perspective. So we have our diagnostic tools defined. We know the global average HDI is sitting at 0.756.
And we know there is a staggering 22% global penalty for inequality.
With that stage set, let's pivot and point the camera directly at Italy.
Let's look at the patient.
Because when you just look at their standard unadjusted HDI track record over the last 30 years, they don't look like a country that should have a massive red arrow on their report.
No, they look like a development miracle.
You look like absolute rock stars.
If we trace Italy's 30-year absolute growth, the numbers are phenomenal. In 1990, Italy had an HDI score of 0.770. By 2023, that score had leaped to a highly impressive 0.915.
Let's contextualize that for the listener. A 0.915 is elite. The UN classifies anything above a 0.8 as very high human development.
And Italy is deeply entrenched in the 0.9 club. They are in the upper echelon of prosperous nations.
Absolutely. But this is where we encounter the first major wrinkle in the narrative.
Right, because relying solely on absolute numbers can be incredibly deceptive.
Because back in 1990, with a much lower score of 0.770, Italy was ranked 20th in the world out of 151 tracked countries.
But fast forward to 2023.
Their score improves dramatically to 0.915, representing massive internal progress. But their global rank slips. They fall from 20th down to 29th out of 203 countries.
Which is fascinating, but I think the timeline itself shows how hard they were fighting to grow.
Yeah, if you look at the granular data year by year, Italy's HDI hit a high of 0.906 in 2019. Then 2020 happens.
Pandemic hit Italy incredibly hard.
If you remember the news from early 2020, northern Italy was essentially the epicenter of the European outbreak. The hospitals in Lombardy were just overwhelmed.
They went into an unprecedented lockdown before almost anyone else in the West.
And their HDI reflects that trauma. It drops down to 0.899. They actually fell out of the 0.9 club.
It was a severe, acute, multidimensional shock. Life expectancy dropped and the economy contracted sharply.
But then you look at the very next year, 2021. The data shows a massive, dramatic rebound.
They jumped straight back up to a 0.908.
That isn't just a slow recovery. That is an explosive bounce back. It shows a society with deep infrastructural resilience.
They took one of the hardest hits in the developed world and recovered almost immediately.
And then they just kept climbing, hitting 0.915 by 2023. So if they are showing that kind of immense resilience and their absolute score went up by so much since 1990, I have to ask about the ranking drop.
Right. Why did they slip from 20th to 29th?
Yeah. Are they secretly failing behind the scenes, or is something else going on globally?
It is definitely the latter. What you are observing is what development economists often call the treadmill effect.
I know this feeling well from the gym. You're running, but you're not getting anywhere.
It's slightly different here. Imagine you are running on a treadmill alongside 100 other people. You are running faster than you ever have before.
Yep.
Your form has improved, your stamina is up, your personal bests are being shattered. You are objectively a much better runner than you were 30 years ago.
So Italy is genuinely improving.
Yes, but the treadmill itself is speeding up. And more importantly, the people on the treadmills next to you who used to be walking are suddenly sprinting.
So Italy didn't slow down.
No. But other nations, particularly emerging developed economies like countries in Eastern Europe, parts of the Asia-Pacific, they began running faster.
Because they started from a lower baseline in 1990, they had more room for explosive growth.
Exactly. They industrialized rapidly, integrated into global markets, and were able to leapfrog over older economies that were already starting to plateau.
That makes mathematical sense. It's easier to raise a country's life expectancy from 50 to 70 than it is to raise it from 80 to 85.
The gains at the top become marginal and incredibly expensive. Furthermore, the pool of competitors grew significantly.
Right. In 1990, the index only ranked 151 countries.
And by 2023, it's ranking 203 countries. So the denominator got larger, new nations entered the fray, and the competition got exponentially fiercer.
So falling from 20th to 29th isn't a sign of Italian decay, it's a sign of global acceleration.
Exactly. And to really appreciate how well Italy is doing on an absolute basis, we need to dissect the three pillars of their 2023 HDI score of 0.915.
Let's break it down. What does a 0.915 look like when you walk out your front door in Milan or Rome?
First, health. This is measured by life expectancy at birth. In 1990, an Italian citizen could expect to live to be 77 years old.
Which was already quite good back then.
It was, but by 2023, that life expectancy had made a massive jump to 83.7 years.
83.7 years old on average. That is an addition of almost 7 full years of life for an entire national population over 3 decades.
It is a staggering biological triumph.
And let's think about how you actually achieve that. You don't add 7 years to an entire population's lifespan just by telling them to, eat more vegetables.
No, you certainly don't.
That requires a phenomenal, accessible, and highly effective national healthcare system. It requires massive reductions in infant mortality.
Advanced geriatric care, public safety, low crime rates.
And yes, probably very good Mediterranean diet. But primarily it's a testament to medical infrastructure.
It is. The Italian National Health Service provides universal coverage to citizens and residents, mostly free of charge at the point of service.
Despite regional variations, the aggregate outcome is world-class longevity. Okay, so they are living incredibly long lives. What about the second pillar? Education.
The data for 2023 shows 10.8 mean years of schooling for the adult population.
Meaning the average adult has completed nearly 11 years of formal education.
Right. But the more forward-looking metric is the expected years of schooling for a child entering the system today. That number is much higher, around 16.7 years.
So a kid starting kindergarten in Italy today can reasonably expect to be in the education system until they are in their early 20s.
They are expected to finish high school and go on to significant university or vocational training.
That indicates a deeply established, robust public education infrastructure. They have created a society that facilitates long-term intellectual development.
It does. Which brings us to the third pillar, the money.
How wealthy is this long-living, highly educated population?
The metric here is income, measured as gross national income, or GNI per capita. In 2023, this figure was $52,389.
Wow.
Now, it's crucial to note that this is adjusted for purchasing power parity, or PPP, using 2021 dollars.
Purchasing power parity. Let's translate that for the listener. That means the UN isn't just looking at the raw exchange rate of euros to dollars, right?
Correct. They are adjusting the number based on how much a loaf of bread or a month of rent actually costs in Italy compared to the US.
It attempts to measure the actual standard of living, not just nominal currency value. And a GNI per capita of over $52,000 places Italy firmly in the ranks of high-income economies.
So we paint the picture. On average, you live to be almost 84, you get nearly 17 years of schooling, and your economy generates over 50 grand a year per person.
Despite the treadmill effect pushing their rank down to 29th, an HDI of 0.915 built on those three pillars is undeniably elite. It sounds like an amazing place to build a life.
It does, but as we discussed earlier, averages can be deceptive.
Ah, right. Because a high average income means nothing if 90% of the population is living in poverty while a few billionaires skew the math.
Which means we need to pull out our next diagnostic tool. We need to look at the IHDI, the Inequality Adjusted Human Development Index.
We need to see how well Italy actually distributes all this incredible health, education, and wealth.
Let's do that, because when we apply the inequality discount to Italy's data, the results are deeply revealing. Do you remember the global average loss we discussed?
The 22% global inequality tax, the leaky pipeline of human potential.
Exactly. Well, according to the report, Italy only loses 10.7% of its human development to internal inequality.
Only 10.7%. That's less than half of the global average loss.
It is. Italy's IHDI score drops from the raw 0.915 down to 0.817.
Let's use that leaky pipeline analogy we established. If economic potential is water pumped by the state reservoir, the global average pipeline is riddled with holes.
It loses 22% of its pressure before it ever reaches the faucets.
That water just vanishes into the hands of a tiny elite or is lost to corruption, leaving the rest of the population to fight over a trickle.
But in Italy, their pipeline is incredibly well sealed by comparison.
Almost 90% of the human development generated by the nation successfully makes its way through the pipes and into the lives of the citizens. That is a massive win for distributional justice.
It is a significant achievement. It proves that the Italian social welfare state, their tax structures, public pensions, universal health care, is highly effective at mitigating the extremes of capitalism.
It ensures that the rising tide actually lifts the majority of the boats. Compared to the global baseline, Italy is a remarkably egalitarian society.
It sounds like a utopia, honestly.
It really does.
However, and this is where the analytical scalpel is required, if we connect this 10.7% aggregate loss to the specific dimensions of development, we find something highly troubling.
Oh boy. The camera in our pipeline just found a major blockage.
Exactly. The 10.7% is an overall average loss across the three dimensions of health, education, and income. But the report breaks down where exactly that inequality resides.
And the variance is stark.
Very. Let's start with health. Inequality in life expectancy in Italy causes only a tiny 2.6% loss.
2.6%. That is incredibly low. That means the mechanism of their universal health care is working almost perfectly.
Whether you are a wealthy executive in Milan or a working-class farmer in Sicily, your biological access to a long life is virtually guaranteed.
The state does not discriminate when it comes to keeping you alive. The biological playing field is remarkably level.
Next, let's look at education. Inequality in education causes a 7.5% loss.
A bit higher than health, but still very low globally. It means there might be some disparities between elite private schools and regional public schools, but generally most people are getting the same access to schooling.
Knowledge is being distributed fairly well, but then we look at the third pillar,
The income.
the inequality in the income domain. The loss there is not 2% or 7%. The loss to income inequality is a staggering 20.6%.
Whoa, wait a minute.
Yes.
So health is basically equal, education is relatively equal, but when it comes to the actual money circulating in the economy, the inequality loss skyrockets to over 20%.
That is a massive discrepancy within their own system.
It really is. It's a critical red flag hidden deep in the data. And if we analyze what this implies structurally, it posits a very specific societal model.
Italy has essentially perfected biological equality. They have perfected basic social equality through widespread school.
The state guarantees your body will be cared for and your mind will be trained. They view health and knowledge as public goods.
Right. But there is a deep structural blockage in economic distribution. The market itself, the actual distribution of wages and financial power, is highly skewed.
So the state takes care of you, but the economy plays favorites. You survive, you learn, but you don't necessarily earn.
That begs a massive question.
It really does. If almost everyone is healthy and almost everyone is educated, who exactly is suffering from that 20.6% income inequality?
If it's not the sick and it's not the uneducated,
Who is getting systematically locked out of the economic miracle?
we are going to answer that very shortly, and I promise you it is the crux of the entire paradox we set out to solve.
But before we investigate the specific victims of that income inequality, there was one more stunning piece of data we have to cover.
Because it adds another layer of complexity to the Italian model.
You're talking about the green surprise. Because when I was reading through the source material, this section completely shocked me.
We need to look at the fifth metric, the
Yeah.
PHDI, the Planetary Pressures Adjusted HDI.
The environmental penalty score.
Exactly. This metric takes Italy's standard score of 0.915 and penalizes it based on two things: their carbon dioxide emissions and their material footprint.
Historically, when you apply this metric, high HDI countries get absolutely crushed.
Oh, totally. Countries like the US, Australia, or Canada, which have massive wealth and high human development, usually see their rankings plummet.
Because their prosperity is deeply tied to heavy carbon pollution and resource extraction, they're burning the furniture to heat the house.
Exactly. So what happens to Italy when you apply the PHDI penalty?
Italy doesn't plummet. In fact, it's the exact opposite. When you apply the environmental adjustment, Italy skyrockets. They go from 29th in the world in standard HDI all the way up to 7th in the world in PHDI.
A 22-place rank increase.
They leapfrog over 24 countries and land squarely in the global top 10 for sustainable development. That is practically unheard of for a major G7 economy.
It's remarkable.
How on earth are they achieving that? Are they just not producing anything anymore?
To understand the mechanics of this, we have to look at the trend lines in their environmental data. Let's look at their per capita CO2 emissions.
Okay.
Back in 2004, Italy's emissions peaked at 8.65 tons of carbon dioxide per person.
8.65 tons. A fairly heavy footprint.
But by 2023, that number had fallen to just 5.3 tons per capita.
That is a massive drop. From 8.65 down to 5.3, that's a reduction of over 38%.
Yes, a 38% reduction in carbon emissions.
But wait, a 38% reduction in carbon over the exact same period where their GNI per capita grew to over $52,000 and their life expectancy went up to almost 84.
Correct.
I have to play devil's advocate here because I'm naturally skeptical of these kinds of green miracles. Is this actual genuine green innovation?
Or an accounting trick.
Yeah. Did Italy just offshore all their dirty, heavy industry to developing nations? Did they just move the steel mills to Asia, import the finished goods back to Milan, and slap a green label on their domestic economy?
Because that's not saving the planet, that's just moving the smokestacks out of your own backyard.
Exactly. It is a vital and common critique of Western green metrics.
And the UN anticipated that exact skepticism, which is why the PHDI doesn't just measure carbon emissions, it also measures the material footprint.
Okay, what exactly is the material footprint mechanically?
It measures the total amount of raw materials, biomass, fossil fuels, metal ores, and non-metal ores that are extracted globally to meet the final consumption demands of a country.
So it tracks the supply chain all the way back to the mine, regardless of what country the mine is in.
Exactly. If Italy just offshored their pollution but kept consuming the same massive amount of resources via imported goods, their material footprint would remain extremely high.
And the PHDI would penalize them anyway. Offshoring doesn't feel a metric.
Right. So what does the data say about Italy's material footprint? It shows that their material footprint remains stable and relatively low for a developed nation, hovering around 16.2 tons per capita, even as their overall wealth grew.
So they aren't just shifting the blame.
No. The data indicates a genuine paradigm shift toward low-carbon development. They haven't perfectly solved resource consumption, no modern economy has, but they have managed a remarkably rare feat.
They have partially decoupled human prosperity from carbon emissions.
Decoupling, that is the holy grail of climate economics.
The ability to grow your GDP, increase your wealth, and improve your standard of living without a corresponding increase in environmental destruction.
Precisely. Historically, the two lines moved in lockstep. More wealth meant more coal burned. Italy has broken that lockstep.
For a nation with a GNI of over $52,000, keeping the material footprint stable at 16.2 tons while actively slashing carbon by 38%, that is the hallmark of a highly efficient, sustainable society.
They are heavily investing in renewable energy grids, improving energy efficiency, and leaning into a service economy that simply requires less raw combustion.
They're literally doing more with less. It's phenomenal.
Oh.
Okay, we need to take a breath and synthesize the profile we built so far.
Because the picture we've painted is almost overwhelmingly positive.
Let's recap what we know about the Italian citizen in 2023. They live in a society where they can expect to live to be almost 84 years old.
They receive nearly 17 years of formal education.
Their economy generates over $50,000 a year per person. The wealth that is generated is distributed far more fairly than the global average, losing only 10% to inequality.
And on top of all that, they are environmentally efficient global leaders, ranking 7th in the world for sustainable development.
Having successfully decoupled their economic growth from their carbon footprint, if you stop reading the report right there, it paints a picture of a veritable utopia.
A template for the 21st century.
It sounds perfect.
There.
So, where's the pain? Why did we start this deep dive talking about a giant, aggressive, blood-red arrow pointing straight down on the cover of the report?
Where's the hidden suffering?
Yeah, because we know there's a 20.6% inequality loss in income hiding somewhere in this utopian society. And we know someone is getting left behind.
And this brings us face to face with the core contradiction of the entire analysis, the gender paradox.
This is where the narrative sharply shifts from biological and environmental triumphs to deep culturally ingrained economic failures.
To see it, we have to look at the GII, the Gender Inequality Index, and contrast it directly with the GDI, the Gender Development Index.
Okay, let's unpack this, because when I first read the numbers in this section, I legitimately thought there was a typo in the spreadsheet. It is incredibly confusing.
It is deeply counterintuitive.
Let's start with the GII, the index that measures structural barriers and health risks for women. Italy ranks an incredible 15th globally in the GII. They dropped their inequality score from 0.240 back in 1990 down to an elite 0.043 in 2023.
And just to clarify, a lower score is better in the GII. It means inequality is shrinking.
Right, so they are 15th in the world for gender inequality, meaning they have very little of it. That is a fantastic ranking. They are near the top of the globe.
They are. The structural health barriers for women are incredibly low.
But then, you look at their GDI rank, the Gender Development Index, the metric that measures the actual gap in human development outcomes between men and women.
And that rank fell from 36th in 1990 all the way down to 88th in 2023.
A massive 52-spot plummet. I am genuinely struggling to reconcile these two realities. How can you be 15th in the world for removing structural gender inequality, but 88th in the world for actual gender development?
It feels like they are winning the biological lottery, but entirely losing the economic race.
That is the absolute best way to frame the paradox. They're winning biologically and losing economically.
To untangle why this happens, we have to look closely at the specific data points feeding into the GII, which drives their high ranking. Why is Italy's GII so good?
Because their medical system is world-class, right?
Yes, and it heavily prioritizes women's reproductive health. Let's look at the numbers. The maternal mortality rate in Italy is exceptionally low. In 2023, the data shows a mere 4.6 deaths per 100,000 live births.
4.6 per 100,000. That means the biological act of pregnancy and giving birth in Italy is statistically incredibly safe. The medical infrastructure protects the mother almost flawlessly.
It does. Furthermore, the adolescent birth rate is negligible. It is down to 2.8 births per 1,000 women, ages 15 to 19.
Meaning young teenage women are not having their lives, their education, or their early careers derailed by early, unplanned pregnancies.
They have access to contraception, education, and autonomy over their reproductive timelines.
Exactly. These two factors, safe childbirth and low adolescent pregnancy, push their GII score to the absolute top of the global charts. The state is doing a magnificent job of protecting women's bodies.
Okay, I understand why they rank 15th there.
Yeah.
But the GDI measures something different. It doesn't just measure physical survival and reproductive health.
Right. It measures the gap in the actual outcomes of a lived life.
Yeah.
The health, the education, and the income.
And when you look at the radar chart in the report that breaks down the GDI into those three pillars, it reveals what the authors call a fatal gap.
Let's walk through that radar chart. How do men and women compare on the three pillars?
It starts off looking very balanced. In education, men and women in Italy are virtually tied. The expected years of schooling for both genders sits right around 16.7 to 17.2 years.
Women are actually slightly outpacing men in university enrollment in many sectors, right?
Yes, so the education is equal. The state provides the knowledge equally.
What about health?
In health, women actually win. They significantly outlive men. The life expectancy for Italian women in 2023 was an astounding 85.7 years. For Italian men, it was 81.6 years.
Women are living more than 4 years longer than men, so they are getting just as much education, and they are living significantly longer. They're actively winning on 2 of the 3 HDI pillars.
This sounds like they should be ranked in the top 10 for gender development.
They should be, until you hit the 3rd pillar on the radar chart, the income. And that is where the chart in Italy's global ranking just shatters.
I have the specific numbers right here, and if you are listening to this, I want you to really focus on this discrepancy.
Hit me with the numbers.
The estimated per capita gross national income for men in Italy in 2023 was $67,001.
A very high figure.
The estimated per capita gross national income for women in Italy in 2023 was $38,437.
It is a jarring drop. I need to repeat that to make sure the math lands. Men are at $67,000. Women are at $38,000.
It's staggering.
Women in Italy who are living 4 years longer, who are just as highly educated, who are protected by a world-class healthcare system, are earning only 57.4% of what the men earn. They're making barely more than half.
This raises an incredibly important, uncomfortable question, doesn't it? If women are healthier, if they're highly educated, and they live in a society that successfully distributes its overall wealth better than most of the globe, why is there a nearly 43% gap in aggregate income?
And suddenly the puzzle pieces snap together. This is where that 20.6% income inequality loss from the IHDI was hiding.
Exactly.
When we asked earlier who was getting left behind in this utopia, it wasn't a specific class of poor workers or a specific region.
The inequality isn't primarily a gap between the top 1% of billionaires and the 99% of workers.
It's a massive structural gap between the 50% of the population who are men and the 50% of the population who are women. It is a profound gendered economic chasm.
But how does a modern European economy even enforce a gap that wide? Is there massive, blatant wage discrimination?
Are Italian companies just legally paying women half as much for the exact same job? Because surely that violates EU labor laws.
Well, while the gender wage gap for equal work exists in Italy, just as it exists everywhere in the world, a discrepancy of 43% cannot be explained simply by men getting paid more for the same job.
Right, that math doesn't add up.
A gap that massive points to something much more foundational. It points to participation. And this leads us to what the report identifies as the dead knot of the Italian economy, the stagnation in the labor force.
Right, because I need to remember how the GNI per capita is calculated. It isn't just taking the salaries of the people who are actively working and averaging them.
No, it takes the total national income and averages it across the entire adult population, whether they are working or not.
Exactly. If you have a huge segment of your population that earns zero formal income, it drags the average down violently.
The report includes a funnel chart that diagnoses this root cause perfectly. It looks at the labor force participation rate. This is the percentage of the adult population that is either employed or actively looking for work.
Let's look at the numbers for 2023. The male labor force participation rate in Italy was 58.77%.
Meaning nearly 60% of all men over the age of 15 are actively engaged in the formal economy. They are working, earning, and paying taxes.
Correct. Now, what is the female participation rate? Let me look. It is only 41.5%.
41.5%.
If you are listening to this in the US or Northern Europe, your jaw probably just dropped. Because 41.5% means that nearly 60% of the entire adult female population in Italy is simply not in the formal paid labor force at all.
They are entirely disconnected from the wage-earning economy.
That is the dead knot. And what makes this not so devastating is not just the 2023 number, but the historical trend line. Let's look back at the starting point of our data, 1990.
In 1990, the male participation rate was 65.7%. The female participation rate was 34.97%.
Wait. Let me do the math on that. From 1990 to 2023, over 33 years, we have lived through massive global feminist movements. We have seen the rise of the internet, the normalization of remote work, explosive technological advancement.
And radically evolving gender norms practically everywhere else in the Western world.
And the female labor force participation rate in Italy only crept up from roughly 35% to 41.5%. It only increased between 6 and 7 percentage points over 3 decades.
It is a long-term, systemic, deeply entrenched stagnation.
That is glacial. That isn't even societal evolution. That is petrification. How does an economy resist that much global momentum?
It demonstrates the immense structural and cultural rigidity of the society. When the report talks about hidden structural pain points, this is the prime example.
The stagnation is driven by deep traditional cultural expectations surrounding gender roles.
There is a deeply ingrained model, historically influenced by traditional Catholic family structures, that views the man as the primary breadwinner and the woman as the primary caregiver.
But culture alone doesn't keep 60% of women out of the workforce, does it? There have to be policy failures supporting that culture.
Absolutely. The cultural expectation is compounded by a severe lack of supportive childcare infrastructure. Public daycare can be scarce or have rigid hours that don't align with full-time employment.
School schedules often require a parent to be home in the mid-afternoon.
Furthermore, elder care is frequently outsourced to the family rather than the state. So women are caught in a sandwich generation trap, expected to care for young children and then subsequently expected to care for aging parents.
They are relegated to the informal, unpaid caregiving economy. So they are working incredibly hard, but they aren't getting paid a dime for it, and it doesn't show up in the GNI.
Yes. And because so few women are in the formal labor force relative to men, their aggregate income plummets to that 57.4% ratio we saw earlier.
And because the women's aggregate income plummets so drastically, the entire Gender Development Index score for the country is severely dragged down.
And this finally explains the massive drop in the global ranking. The 52 spot plummet from 36th to 88th. The world didn't stand still.
The treadmill effect returns with a vengeance.
Exactly. While Italy's cultural structures regarding female employment remained petrified over the last 30 years, the rest of the world was sprinting.
The GDI rankings expanded massively. In 1990, only 77 countries provided enough data to be ranked. By 2023, 194 countries are participating.
Dozens of other nations in Latin America, parts of Asia, other European countries that started way behind Italy, they aggressively integrated women into their formal economy.
They built childcare networks. They incentivized dual-income households. They passed Italy by entirely in the realm of economic gender parity.
It is the ultimate paradox of the report. The Italian state invests heavily in women's biology. They ensure they live to be almost 86.
The state invests heavily in their intellect. They ensure they receive 17 years of schooling.
But the economy and the culture rigidly refuse to integrate their labor.
I want you listening to really imagine this scenario from the perspective of an economic planner or prime minister. You have half of your entire national population, millions of women, who are highly educated.
The state has invested untold millions of euros into their schooling, from kindergarten through university.
They are remarkably healthy, living longer than almost anyone else on Earth. You have built this incredible world-class reservoir of human capital. And then you just leave the valve shut.
Their economic potential, their innovation, their tax revenue is largely left untapped.
From a purely cold macroeconomic standpoint, it is a disaster of inefficiency. From a human flourishing standpoint, it's a tragedy.
You cannot build a very high human development society if half the population is locked out of the economic machinery.
Okay, we need to bring all these disparate threads together. We've looked at the biology, the environment, the inequality, and the gender stagnation.
The report synthesizes all this data into what they call the Italian development logic chain.
Walk us through this chain. How does the report summarize the current state of the nation?
The logic chain perfectly encapsulates the multidimensional profile we've built. First, it identifies the strengths.
Right.
Italy possesses a top-tier medical system yielding incredibly high longevity, coupled with high resource efficiency, proven by their #7 ranking in the Planetary Pressures HDI. They are biologically healthy and environmentally sustainable.
Second, the stability. They have solid internal distribution justice for basic services. That 10.7% IHDI loss means they're much better than the global average at ensuring the baseline of survival and education is met for almost everyone.
The welfare state prevents catastrophic poverty.
But finally, the weakness. The gaping hole in gender economic power.
The culturally rigid, low female labor participation rate leads to a massive aggregate income gap, which completely tanks their global gender development standing and represents a massive loss of national potential.
So what is the roadmap? How do they fix it? What are the strategic solutions for moving toward what the report calls full dimensional excellence?
The solutions are conceptually clear, but politically and culturally extremely difficult to execute. First, they must maintain their green advantage.
They have proven they can decouple growth from carbon. They need to stay the course, invest further in renewables, and protect that elite PHDI ranking.
But the absolute key, the most critical priority for the next decade is releasing female potential.
They have to untie the dead knot.
They must bridge that gap in labor participation. Moving the female participation rate from 41.5% up to the male equivalent of 58.7% would radically transform the Italian economy.
It would unleash a wave of productivity and tax revenue.
But to do that, they cannot just tell women to get jobs. They have to build the infrastructure to allow it. That requires massive state investment in affordable, accessible childcare.
It requires aggressive shifts in corporate culture regarding flexible working hours and remote work.
And it requires policy incentives that reward dual-income households rather than penalizing them.
But there is a third element here, a looming threat that we haven't explicitly named yet, which makes unlocking the female workforce not just a nice idea for gender equality, but an absolute existential emergency for the Italian state.
And it ties all the way back to the very first pillar of the HDI, the demographic time bomb.
If we connect all the dots we've discussed today, yes. We rightly celebrate that Italians live to be almost 84 years old, with women living to nearly 86. It is a profound human development triumph.
But what happens to an economy when a massive, ever-growing portion of your population is over the age of 65, retired, requiring increased geriatric medical care and drawing state pensions for 20 or 30 years.
You need a massive base of young working people paying taxes to support them. You need a huge influx of revenue to keep the pension system and that world-class healthcare system solvent.
Exactly. The longevity triumph creates immense Social Security pressure. And if 60% of your adult women are not in the formal workforce paying income taxes, you are trying to support a rapidly aging, increasingly expensive society with one hand tied firmly behind your back.
You simply do not have the tax base to sustain the welfare state. Unlocking the female workforce is no longer just an ethical imperative. It is a mathematical necessity to keep the state from collapsing under the weight of its own demographic success.
Wow, it all connects so perfectly. The biological triumph of longevity creates the demographic pressure, which exacerbates the economic failure of the gender gap.
You can't separate the metrics. They all influence each other. The whole system is tightly wound together.
That is the beauty and the terror of multidimensional human development analysis. It shows you that a country is a living organism, not just a spreadsheet of GDP.
Which brings us to the end of our journey today. To summarize this incredibly complex narrative, Italy is a fascinating, frustrating paradox. We started by looking at a country with a skyrocketing standard of living, high welfare, incredibly low environmental cost, balanced overall distribution of basic services.
But our diagnostic tools, our multidimensional MRI, revealed that it is quietly crippled by a rigid, culturally ingrained gender structure in its economy.
The numbers prove, without a shadow of a doubt, that true progress isn't just about a rising HDI score. It's not just about living longer or having a higher average GNI.
True progress requires equal access to the machinery of that development. It means everyone gets to actively participate in the economy they are a part of.
The data unequivocally shows that you can build the finest infrastructure for human development in the world, but if the cultural and economic doors remain locked for half the population, your development is fundamentally incomplete and ultimately unsustainable.
That's the ultimate takeaway.
I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over. Something to chew on the next time you hear a politician bragging about their country's GDP or life expectancy. Think about the incredible flexibility Italy showed in another area. We saw that they possessed the immense innovation required to partially decouple their economic growth from their environmental footprint.
They literally changed how their society interacts with nature, dropping carbon emissions by 38% while growing their wealth.
They prove they can fundamentally alter their national paradigm when forced to. So here is the question. If they are capable of that level of profound systemic reinvention, is it possible they can apply that exact same innovative spirit to decouple their economic structures from their traditional gender roles?
Can they achieve a social decoupling, untying the dead knot of labor, just as they achieved a carbon decoupling?
That is the challenge, not just for Italy, but for any nation trying to survive the next 30 years. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We love unpacking these complex stories with you, finding the hidden mechanisms and the aha moments buried inside spreadsheets and line graphs. Keep questioning the headlines, keep looking under the hood, and we will catch you on the next deep dive.